Get comfortable. Loosen whatever is still fastened. Let the pillow take the weight of your head, and let the room around you go quiet and dim. Tonight we are going to the English seaside in the summer of 1878, and you are going to go there not as a visitor to a museum, but as a woman who has to make the whole thing happen. You have almost certainly seen the picture already. It arrives fully formed because it has been printed on 1,000 tins and postcards and biscuit lids since. A woman in white, a parasol tilted against a mild sun, standing at the edge of the water with her skirts lifted an inch above the wet sand. A wooden hut on wheels behind her. A brass band somewhere off to the left, playing something cheerful. Children with buckets. A pier stretching out over water that is, in the picture, always a pleasant shade of blue-green rather than the actual colour of the Irish Sea, which is closer to the colour of weak tea with milk in it. That picture is not a lie exactly. Every element of it existed. The parasol existed. The hut on wheels existed. The band existed. And the pier absolutely existed. And it charged you a penny to walk on it. But the picture has been cropped. It has been cropped very carefully, and what has been cut out of the frame is all the work. Because here is the thing about a Victorian seaside holiday, and it is the thing the postcards were specifically designed not to show you. A holiday of this kind did not simply occur. It was manufactured. Somebody had to decide it could be afforded, and that decision involved a year of small deprivations laid down in advance. Somebody had to write to a landlady in a town they had never seen, and secure rooms on the strength of a stranger's handwriting. Somebody had to work out how many clean shirts a family of 5 requires for 7 days in a place where no washing may be done, and then pack those shirts into a trunk light enough that the carriage of it would not eat the money set aside for food. Somebody had to buy the rail tickets, feed 3 children on a 3-hour train journey without spilling anything on the good clothes they would be judged by on arrival. And then, on arrival, negotiate terms with a businesswoman who did this 40 times a season and had heard every objection before. That somebody is you. And I want to be honest with you at the very start about what kind of holiday this is, because the word itself is misleading to modern ears. When you hear holiday, you probably hear rest. You hear an absence of duty. For a woman of your station in 1878, a week at the sea is not an absence of duty. It is a relocation of duty to less convenient premises, with strangers watching. The cooking is done by someone else, which is a real relief and should not be dismissed. But the managing, the budgeting, the watching, the arranging, the deciding, and above all the maintaining of appearances, all of that comes with you in the trunk, and it does not get lighter for the journey. So that is the version we are going to live through tonight. Not the parasol, the whole apparatus behind the parasol. If you find this sort of thing worth an hour or 2 of your evening, do subscribe, and if you feel like it, leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what the weather is doing there. I read them, usually at an hour when I ought to be asleep myself. That is all the asking I am going to do. Let the room go soft now, and let us go back. It is the last week of July in 1878, and you are in Manchester. Specifically, you are in a narrow brick terrace on a street of identical narrow brick terraces. in a district that was fields within the memory of people still living. The house has a front parlour you use perhaps twice a week, a back kitchen where the real life of the family happens, 2 bedrooms above, and a small attic room. There is a yard behind with a mangle in it, and a wall too high to see over. Everything in the street is the colour of soot, including the things that were not that colour when they were built, and including, if you are honest about it, the underside of every hem you own. You are 34 years old. You have been married 11 years. Your husband is a clerk in a cotton warehouse in the centre of the city, a position with a desk, a stool, a set of ledgers, and about £200 a year attached to it. That figure matters enormously, and we will come back to it repeatedly, because almost everything about the week ahead is determined by it. £200 a year puts you above the great mass of the population and comfortably below the people who own things. It is enough to keep one servant, a girl of 16 who sleeps in the attic and does the heavy work, and it is not enough to keep 2. It is enough to own a piano you play badly, and to have the front parlour furnished for visitors who rarely come. It is enough just to go to the sea for a week in summer, provided the year has been managed with some care. You have 3 children. The eldest is 9, the middle one is 6, and the youngest is 4, and has been thin since Christmas, with a cough that has never quite finished. That cough is going to matter. It is, in a sense, the reason for everything that happens this week, or at least it is the reason you were able to say out loud at the right moment that a week at the sea was necessary rather than merely desirable. There is a particular skill in knowing which argument will succeed and when to deploy it, and you have that skill, though nobody will ever describe it as a skill. The window in the back kitchen looks out onto the yard wall. Beyond it, and beyond a great many other walls, there are chimneys. On a still day in summer, the air has a taste to it, a faint metallic sweetness at the back of the throat, and there are days when the light through the window at noon is the colour of tea. You have stopped noticing it in the way that you stop noticing a sound that never ends. But your youngest has not stopped coughing, and the doctor, who charged a fee you thought about for 2 days afterwards, said the word that unlocked the whole enterprise. Sea air. Now let us pause on that, because this is already the first place the picture on the tin misleads. The seaside holiday, in the form you are about to experience it, is not an ancient tradition. It is not something the English have always done. Your grandmother did not do this. Your grandmother almost certainly never saw the sea at all, and if she had wanted to, the journey would have taken her 2 days by coach, and cost more than a warehouse clerk earns in a month. What you are about to do exists because of a set of changes so recent that men your husband's age can remember the world before them. The railways came first, and they came fast. Within a single generation, the coast stopped being a distant abstraction and became a place you could reach between breakfast and lunch. Then came the cheap excursion fare, the organized party, the idea that a railway company could make more money moving 1,000 ordinary people once than moving 50 wealthy ones. And then, in 1871, Parliament passed the Bank Holidays Act, which did something quite extraordinary. It fixed, in law, a small number of days on which the ordinary working population of the country was not expected to be at work. 4 of them in England. Not many, but enough that the whole coastline reorganized itself around them within a decade. So the thing you are preparing for is new. It is a middle-class invention, barely older than your marriage, and it has already hardened into an obligation. That is the part worth understanding before we go any further. Nobody in your street goes to the sea because a doctor commanded it. Not really. They go because the family 2 doors down went last year and mentioned it at length for 11 months afterwards. They go because a week at the coast has become one of the small handful of things that separates a household that is managing from a household that is slipping. It is a performance of solvency, staged in public, in front of an audience of complete strangers who are also performing. And you know that. You are not naive about it. You know exactly what the trunk is for, and you know that the good dress folded on top of it is not for your own pleasure. You also genuinely want to see the sea. Both of those things are true at once, and there is no contradiction in them. And a great deal of what makes this week interesting is the constant negotiation between the two. It is Wednesday evening. The children are upstairs and mostly quiet. The account book is open on the parlor table, which is where it always ends up when a decision has to be made, rather than merely recorded. And beside it is a letter from a woman in a coastal town 200 miles away, confirming that she has rooms available from the following Monday. Terms as stated, deposit received, obliged. There are 5 days left. In those 5 days, you will count linen, argue about weight, buy tinned things you do not need at home, and work out to the shilling what this is going to cost. Because the difference between a week that ends well and a week that ends badly is entirely a matter of arithmetic done in advance. So let us begin where you begin. Not on the sand, at the table, with the book open, and the sum at the bottom of the column that has to be made to work. You are 34 years old. You were born in a town outside Manchester, and you have lived within 20 miles of it your whole life. You married at 23, which was neither early nor late, and you have 3 living children, the eldest a boy of 9, then a girl of 6, then the youngest, a boy of 4, who was ill through the whole of last winter and has not quite got his colour back. Your husband is a clerk in a cotton warehouse. This is worth pausing over, because the word clerk has drifted in meaning, and now suggests something small. In 1878 it does not. He keeps the books for a firm that moves raw cotton and finished cloth through a warehouse near the centre of the city. He writes a fine, legible hand, which is a professional qualification. He knows the arithmetic of bales and freight and insurance. He earns roughly £200 a year, paid monthly, and that figure places your household in a very particular and rather anxious position on the English social ladder. £200 a year means you keep 1 servant. She is a general servant, sometimes called a maid of all work, and she is 19, and she is paid about £14 a year, with her food and her bed and a room at the top of the house that is cold 9 months of the year. She does the heavy laundry, the scrubbing, the fires, the front step. You do the cooking, most of the marketing, all of the sewing, all of the mending, all of the accounts, and all of the managing of her. Having 1 servant does not mean you do not work. It means you do a different set of work, and it means you can be described, in a census return as something other than a woman who scrubs. That single servant is the line. Below it, in the terraced streets a few minutes' walk away, are families on £90 or £100 a year, where the wife does everything herself and takes in sewing besides. Above it, at 400 or 500, are households with a cook and a housemaid and a nursemaid, and a wife who genuinely does very little with her own hands. You sit in the narrow band between, and the whole texture of your life is organized around not slipping downward out of it. Which brings us to the sea. Here is what is easy to misunderstand about a Victorian seaside holiday. The image that survives is aristocratic. Bath chairs, private carriages, a family of leisure removing itself from London for the season. The whole thing an expression of money so settled that nobody in the party has to think about it. That was real, and it came first. And by 1878, it is no longer the main story at all. The main story is you. The seaside holiday, by the 1870s, has become a middle-class obligation. Not a treat, not an indulgence. An expected annual expenditure, like coal, like the doctor, like the subscription to the chapel. And its function is only partly recreational. Its main function is to be a thing you have done, and can be known to have done. Because respectability in this class is not a state. It is a series of visible acts. It is the front step scrubbed. It is the piano in the parlour, whether or not anyone plays it well. It is the children's boots being sound. And it is increasingly the fact that in August you go away, and in September the neighbours know that you went away, and the woman in the next pew can ask you whether you found the air agreeable, and you can say that you did. None of this is spoken aloud. Nobody in your street says the words. But everybody understands the accounting. And the accounting is why the sum at the bottom of the column has to be made to work. So let us do the sum, because the numbers themselves are more interesting than any description of anxiety. Rail fare first. The railways have made this whole phenomenon possible, and by the late 1870s, the cost of getting a family from an inland manufacturing city to a coastal resort is genuinely within reach. A third-class return ticket over a distance of, say, 60 or 70 miles runs to something in the region of 4 or 5 shillings for an adult. Children under 12 go at roughly half. For 5 of you, travelling third class on an ordinary service, you might be looking at 15 to 18 shillings all told, and that is before the trunk, which is carried at a rate by weight, and which will add another shilling or 2 if you have been careless about what went into it. Lodgings next, and this is the large item. In a resort in high season, you are not renting a hotel room. You are renting apartments, which in this context means a sitting room and 1 or 2 bedrooms in a private house. And the going rate for a family in a respectable but unfashionable street a few minutes back from the front is somewhere between 12 and 20 shillings a week for the rooms alone. A room with a sea view costs more, sometimes considerably more, and you have already decided you are not paying for a view. The difference will buy the children a good deal. Then food, which you provide yourself, and which we will come to properly later, because the apartment system deserves its own explanation. Reckon on rather more than you spend at home, because resort prices in season are what they are. and call it 15 or 18 shillings for the week if you are careful. Then the extras. The cooking charge, the charge for the use of the cruet, the charge for candles, the pier toll, the bathing machine at 6p or a shilling, the boy who carries the trunk, the performers on the sand with the hat going round, the photographer, the stick of lettered rock that your daughter will ask for on the second day and every day thereafter. Add it, and you arrive somewhere between £3 and £4 for the week, which, against an income of £200 a year, is something in the order of 1.5% to 2% of everything your household will earn between 1 January and the next. Put another way, it is a week's wages for a skilled working man. Put another way, still, it is more than half of what you pay your servant for an entire year of her labour, spent in 6 days on air and salt water and the right to have gone. That is the figure at the bottom of the column. And that is why the book is open on the parlour table on a Wednesday evening, rather than in the drawer where it lives. The book itself is a ruled ledger, bought for a few pence, and you have kept one continuously since the first year of your marriage. The left-hand columns are the fixed things: rent, coal, the servant's wage, the chapel, the insurance, the doctor's account when there is one. The right-hand columns are the moving things, the marketing, the boots, the drapery. And these are the ones that must be squeezed when the fixed things will not move. You have been squeezing them since March. That is the part of this story that does not appear in any photograph of a Victorian family on a beach. The holiday was not decided upon in July. It was decided upon in the winter, and it has been paid for in small subtractions ever since. A little less butter, the girl's dress turned rather than replaced, the good tea kept for Sundays only. You have been assembling this week the way you would assemble anything else, out of many small deliberate refusals, over months, quietly, without announcing it. Beside the ledger tonight is a second sheet of paper, and on it you have written the coming week's estimate in your own hand, in 2 columns, what it should cost and what it might cost. The gap between those 2 columns is where all the real management happens. Your husband will look at the first column. You will spend the week defending the second. Now, the reason all of this is happening at all in 1878, rather than in 1848, is partly the railway, and partly something else entirely, which is a piece of legislation. In 1871, Parliament passed the Bank Holidays Act. It was a modest piece of law with an unglamorous name, introduced by a banker and jurist named John Lubbock, and its purpose on paper was simply to fix certain days on which banks would not be obliged to honour bills. It named a small number of days in the year: Easter Monday, Whit Monday, the first Monday in August, Boxing Day. What it did in practice was invent the English holiday. Because once the banks closed, a great many other things closed with them. And for the first time, large numbers of working and lower middle-class people found themselves in possession of a whole day, legally, predictably, on the same date as everybody else. And the railways, which are commercial concerns and can read a calendar, immediately understood what that meant. They laid on excursion trains. They cut fares to fill carriages that would otherwise run empty. They advertised the sea. Within a very few years, the effect had spread outward from the single day. Employers, particularly in the northern textile towns, began closing for a whole week, the Wakes Weeks, staggered town by town, so the resorts were not all overwhelmed at once. Savings clubs sprang up, penny a week, so that a family could pay for August in January. And the coastal towns, which had been genteel little bathing places for invalids and the well-off, expanded at extraordinary speed into something entirely new, with piers and promenades and streets of lodging houses built specifically to absorb people exactly like you. You are not doing something ancient and traditional. You are doing something that is perhaps 15 years old, that your own mother never did, and that already feels compulsory. So the sum has to work. You look at the 2 columns again. You move a shilling from one line to another, which changes nothing except that it makes the total look like a decision rather than a hope. Then you close the book and set the estimate inside the cover and go up to check that the youngest is properly covered, because in 5 days he will be standing on wet sand for the first time in his life, and getting him there is your work, and it has already begun. 3 days before departure, the bedroom floor stops being a floor and becomes a system. You have laid everything out in rows, because the trunk will only take what it takes, and the only way to know what fits is to see it all at once, uncompressed, spread across the boards where you can walk around it. There is a row for each child and a row for each adult, and then a 4th row along the wall for things that belong to no one in particular and will still be needed. The sewing kit, the boot brushes, the small bottle of camphorated oil, a folded oilcloth for the sand. You have done this before, but never for the sea, and the sea changes the arithmetic in ways you are still working out. Begin with yourself, since your own packing is the largest single problem and the one you are most tempted to postpone. A woman of your position, going away for 7 days in 1878, is not packing clothes. She is packing a wardrobe with internal logic, in which each item exists in relation to the others, and cannot be removed without collapsing part of the structure. Underneath everything is the chemise, plain white cotton, worn next to the skin, and washed more often than anything else you own. Over that, the corset, which for daytime is a fitted thing of cotton coutil stiffened with steel and cord, and which is not, whatever later centuries would decide about it, an instrument of suffering so much as a piece of engineering. It carries the weight of the skirts off your hips and onto your ribs and spine. Without it, the dresses of the period, which are heavy, simply do not hang correctly, and do not stay where they are put. Over the corset, drawers, and then a petticoat. And then, in this particular decade, a second petticoat cut narrower than the first, because the fashionable silhouette has moved close to the body in front and gathered the fullness behind. Then the dress itself, bodice and skirt, and the dress is where the layers begin to cost real money. You are taking 2-day dresses. One is a printed cotton, light, washable in principle, though not in practice on a holiday. The other is a wool and silk mixture in a dark colour, for the promenade, and for church, and for any afternoon that turns cold, which at the English seaside is most of them. You have a third dress at home that is better than both, and you have decided, after some genuine argument with yourself, to leave it. It is too good. It would be noticed as too good, which is nearly as bad as being noticed as too poor, and it would arrive creased, and there is nobody at the lodgings to press it properly. Then the accessories. which are not decoration, but the actual grammar of the thing. A shawl, a jacket, 2 pairs of gloves, because gloves at the seaside are worn constantly and get filthy constantly, from salt and sand and the iron rails of the pier, a bonnet and a straw hat, the hat for the beach, and the bonnet for anything that could be called an occasion. Boots, and a second pair of boots. And here you pause, because 2 pairs of boots for 1 adult is a substantial share of a trunk. Now the difficult item, the one that has no equivalent in ordinary life. The bathing costume is made of flannel. This is the first thing that surprises people who imagine the Victorian seaside from photographs, where the garments look dark and shapeless, and are assumed to be dark and shapeless out of pure prudery. Prudery is certainly part of it. But wool is the real answer to the question, and the reason is thermal. The Irish Sea in August is not warm. It is a temperature that a modern swimmer would describe as bracing, and that you would describe, once you are standing in it, as an entirely serious physical event. Wool holds warmth when wet in a way that cotton and linen simply do not. It also does not turn transparent, which cotton does immediately, and which is precisely why the bathing costumes of the period are made from a fabric that behaves well when soaked in every sense at once. Yours is a 2-piece arrangement, a tunic falling below the knee over loose trousers gathered at the ankle, in navy flannel with a band of white braid at the collar and cuff, because even here, even in the water, the garment is trimmed. It weighs almost nothing dry. It will weigh a considerable amount wet, and it will not dry overnight in a rented room. And this fact quietly shapes everything else you pack. Which brings you to the second problem, the one that turns the trunk from a container into a calculation. There is no washing at the lodgings. Understand what this means. At home, you have a rhythm. Monday is wash day, and the whole house submits to it, the copper lit, the kitchen steaming, the servants' hands raw by afternoon, and yours not much better, and everything the household wears passes through that cycle and comes back. It is exhausting, and it is unpaid, and it is also, crucially, a system. The system does not travel. The landlady at a seaside apartment house will cook your food and clean your rooms and answer the bell. She will not do your laundry, and if she can be persuaded to arrange it, it will be sent out to a local woman at a price designed for people with more money than you. So the count changes. Everything that touches skin has to be multiplied by 7, or as close to 7 as you can bear to carry, because there is no midweek recovery. Chemises, drawers, stockings, collars, cuffs, handkerchiefs, nightgowns, the children's underthings. You sit on the edge of the bed with a pencil and actually count 5 sets for each child, which means at least 2 days where something is worn twice, which means you have already accepted a compromise you would not accept at home. Stockings you have simply given up on. 8 pairs for 3 children, and a darning needle, and the assumption that sand and shingle will destroy at least 2. The collars and cuffs are detachable, which is a small mercy of the age. They are the parts of a garment that show dirt first, at the neck and wrist, and because they detach, they can be rinsed in a basin at night and hung over a chair back, and a dress that is not remotely clean can look entirely clean at the only 2 points anyone examines. There is a whole invisible economy of respectability living in that fact. By the second evening of packing, your husband comes up and stands in the doorway and observes that the trunk looks heavy. This is not an idle remark, and you both know it. The trunk has to be carried. It has to be carted to the station, loaded, unloaded, carried again from the platform to the lodgings. And every one of those movements is either your own arms or somebody else's for money. A large trunk means a porter at both ends, and a porter is sixpence, and sixpence twice is a shilling, and a shilling is the pier, and 2 ices, and something left over. So you have the conversation that every family of your means has in the week before a holiday, and it is conducted with great politeness and considerable pressure underneath. He suggests that some of it could be left. You point out which items those would be, in order, and what would happen if they were. He does not know that a child at the seaside goes through stockings the way a mill goes through cotton. He is not being unreasonable. He simply has never been the person holding the pencil. You compromise 1 trunk and a carpet bag that you will carry yourself, and that contains everything needed on the journey and the first night, on the reasonable assumption that the trunk may arrive late. Then the boots. 3 pairs, 1 for each child, and they are the most stubborn thing in the room, because boots do not fold. They are also the thing you most seriously considered leaving behind, and could not. A child at the sea will be in wet sand daily. Wet leather that cannot dry becomes cracked leather, and cracked leather becomes a new pair of boots in September at 8 shillings and 6pence a pair. And 8 shillings and 6pence is the better part of 2 days of your husband's earnings. So each child takes a second pair. The old ones, the ones already ruined, specifically to be ruined further. The medicine bottle goes in, wrapped in a stocking. Nothing dramatic, just the ordinary contents of any household cupboard. Something for a stomach upset, and something for a headache, because you will be 100 miles from your own doctor, and a stranger's chemist charges what he likes in August. And then, last, the food. You pack tea. You pack a loaf of sugar, and a tin of biscuits, and a small jar of jam, and a pot of potted meat sealed under butter, and a wedge of cheese wrapped in muslin, and a bag of oatmeal. Not because you cannot buy these things at the coast. You can buy all of them within 4 minutes of the lodging house door. You pack them because the shops at a resort in season have discovered a fundamental truth about visitors, which is that a woman who has traveled 3 hours with 3 children and has no other option will pay whatever the price on the label says. Butter that is a shilling a pound at home is 15 pence there. Sugar, milk, bread, all of it lifted a fraction, and a fraction repeated across 7 days is the difference between the holiday costing what you estimated and costing what holidays actually cost. So the trunk goes down with the small weight of your own kitchen inside it, and you press the lid and kneel on it and get the strap through the buckle on the second attempt. It is done. It is heavier than he would like and lighter than you would like, which is roughly the definition of a family compromise, and it stands by the bedroom door for 2 more days, like a thing waiting to be asked a question. The morning of departure begins at 4, which is not a time so much as a decision made the night before and regretted on waking. You lie for a moment in the dark and listen to the house, which is silent in a way it never is, because the servant is already up, and the fire is already going, and the kettle is already on, and none of it has been done by you. That is the last piece of household management you will perform in Manchester for 8 days. You arranged, the previous evening, for the water to be hot by 4:30, so that nobody would be washed in cold. And the arrangement has held, and the reward for a good arrangement is that it becomes invisible the moment it succeeds. You dress by candle. The travelling costume is the brown one, wool high to the throat, because a railway carriage in summer is either a furnace or a wind tunnel, depending on whether a stranger has opened the window, and wool forgives both. Over it goes a dust cloak, which is not decoration. It is the only thing standing between your dress and 3 hours of cold smoke. The children are woken in the order of least to most difficult. The eldest wakes properly and immediately sits up, remembers where she is going, and becomes useless with excitement. The middle one wakes slowly and complains. The youngest does not wake at all in any meaningful sense, and is dressed the way you would dress a doll, limb by limb, while he leans his forehead against your shoulder and breathes. Breakfast is bread and dripping and tea, eaten standing. Nobody wants it. Everybody is made to eat it, because the next reliable food is a great many miles away, and you have seen what happens to a 5-year-old on an empty stomach in a moving train. At 5:20, you leave the house. The street is grey and smells of wet stone and last night's smoke, and the air has that early coolness that Manchester manages for about 40 minutes a day in August before the mills exhale. Your husband walks ahead with the porter's boy, who has come with a handcart for the trunk, engaged the previous week for 6pence. The children walk in a line, holding hands, which lasts until the corner. You carry the basket. The basket is the second luggage system, and it is entirely yours. The trunk is registered and vanishes into the van, and is not seen again until the coast. The basket stays on your knees. In it, the food for the journey, the flannel for spills, the 2 smallest pairs of boots in case of rain, the medicine bottle, a book for the eldest, and a folded shawl that will become a pillow, a screen, a blanket, and a bandage before the day is finished. The station is already loud at 6 in the morning. It is loud in a particular way that has only existed for about 30 years, and that nobody has yet got used to. Under the roof, the sound of a locomotive letting off steam arrives not as a noise, but as a physical pressure against the chest. There are barrows. There are dogs. There is a man shouting the names of towns in a voice that has been worn down to a single flat note. There is the smell that belongs to every station in England in this decade, which is coal and hot iron and oil and horse, and faintly underneath oranges. And there are, on the platforms, perhaps 1,100 people who have all had the same idea as you. This is the thing to slow down for, because the crowd is the whole story. 40 years ago, the seaside was reached by coach, over 2 days, for a sum that placed it beyond nearly everybody in this station. The railway did not make the seaside cheaper by a little. It made it cheaper by an order of magnitude, and then the excursion train made it cheaper again. The excursion train is a specific invention, and a fairly cynical one. A railway company owns a great deal of rolling stock that sits idle on a summer weekend. Filling those carriages with people paying a very low fare produces more money than leaving them in a siding, So the company advertises a return fare to the coast at 3 shillings, or 2 and 6, sometimes less, on a train that stops at every set of points between here and the sea, and takes twice as long as a proper service. The carriages are often the oldest the company still owns. On some lines, in the early years, they had no roofs at all, and passengers arrived at the coast varnished in soot. A cabinet maker named Thomas Cook noticed the arithmetic of this before most people did. He began by chartering a train for a temperance meeting, discovered that organizing other people's travel was itself a trade, and built a business on the principle that an ordinary family will pay a small premium to have somebody else handle tickets, lodgings, and the terror of unfamiliar timetables. By this summer, his firm sells arrangements for the whole of Europe. But the model that made him is the one operating on this platform right now. Gather enough people, negotiate a rate, sell the seats, take the difference. You are not traveling by excursion. This matters, and you know exactly how much it matters. Your husband has bought second class. The difference between the classes is not comfort in the way you might assume. It is upholstery, glass, and company. Third class in 1878 is legally obliged to be roofed and to have seats, because Parliament required it 34 years ago. But the seats are bare boards. The compartment is longer, the windows are fewer, and it will hold whoever the platform sends into it. Second class gives you a cushion, a proper window with a leather strap to raise and lower it, a compartment holding 8 rather than a great many, and a door that shuts on the world. First class gives you armrests, a lamp that works, and a nearly certain guarantee of privacy. The fares run roughly at a penny a mile for third, 2p for second, 3p for first, though every company arranges its own tariff, and the excursion rates undercut all of them. For the 4 of you, plus the youngest at half fare, the second class return costs something close to £2 and 5 shillings. Third would have cost a little over £1. That difference, near enough 25 shillings, is a very great deal of money in a household, running on 200 a year. It is a fortnight of the servant's wages. It is a decent pair of boots, and it is spent anyway because of what the ticket announces about you when you step down onto the platform at the other end, in front of a landlady who will decide within 4 seconds what sort of family she is admitting to her front rooms. The choice of carriage is not transport. It is a statement made in advance to strangers about where you sit in a hierarchy that nobody has written down and everybody can read. The compartment, when you find it, contains 2 other people already. An elderly man with a folded newspaper who nods and does not speak again for 100 miles, and a woman of about your own age, alone, in dark blue, with a valise, who catches your eye as you steer 3 children through the door, and gives you the small closed smile of one who understands exactly what the next 3 hours will require of you. The doors bang. A whistle. The station roof begins to slide backwards. What follows is not travel. It is a shift. The youngest wants the window seat, gets it, and is contented for 11 minutes. The middle one wants the window seat, does not get it, and expresses himself on the subject at some length. The eldest reads 4 pages of her book, and then discovers travel sickness, which is managed with the flannel, a boiled sweet, and instructions to look at the horizon, rather than the near hedges. The youngest needs the lavatory, which does not exist, and is told with great firmness that he does not. You divide the journey into portions and dispense them the way a nurse dispenses doses. Bread and butter at the first long stop. A boiled sweet each after Bolton. The apple quartered, with the pocket knife, somewhere in the hills. 2 of the 3 fall asleep in the last hour, one against your arm and one against the woman in dark blue, who does not move for 20 minutes so as not to wake him. And who says, when you apologize, that she has 4 of her own at home, and this is the first week in 9 years she has travelled without them. Outside, the country changes in stages that you can read like a page. First, the mills and the terraces and the canals, brick after brick after brick, chimneys standing in ranks, with their smoke leaning all the same way. Then the edges fray, then hills, actual hills, green and stupidly bright, with sheep on them, and a light coming through the window that has no grey in it at all. Then flatness, then a widening, then fields with no hedges worth speaking of, and wind flattening the grass in long grey sweeps, and the sky suddenly occupying 3/4 of the glass instead of 1. And then the eldest, who has been quiet for a while, says nothing at all, but takes hold of your sleeve. There is a line at the far edge, low down, the colour of pewter, with a slight movement in it. It is a poor first view. It is glimpsed over an embankment, past a fence, through a window smeared with the whole of Lancashire, and it lasts perhaps 6 seconds before a cutting takes it away. But you are a woman who was born in a city where the horizon is a wall of buildings and the sky is a lid, and who has spent 34 years looking at things that end. And here is a thing that does not end. It goes to the edge of the glass and keeps going, and there is nothing on it, and nobody owns it, and it is doing something continuously for no reason and for nobody, and it has been doing it the entire time you have been at home counting linen. Your middle child asks whether the sea is always that colour. You say you do not know. It is, you realize, entirely true. The carriage smells of coal and boiled sweets and warm child. Somebody further down the train has begun, badly, to sing. The train slows for a long time before it stops. That is the first thing you notice about a resort station in July. There is no brisk arrival. There is a gradual surrender, a series of small shudders through the couplings, while the carriages ahead of you empty into a noise you can hear through closed glass. When the door opens, the noise arrives properly, and it is not the sea. It is people, it is several hundred people, all trying to occupy the same 40 yards of platform at the same moment, and above them the roof of the station holding the heat in, and somewhere the shriek of another engine coming in behind yours on the second road, and a boy shouting the name of a lodging house over and over in a voice already worn out at 11 in the morning. You get the children down first, one at a time, by the arm, because the step down from a third-class carriage to the platform is high, and your middle one is not to be trusted with judgment of any kind. Then the baskets. Then the parcel of food, which is now a parcel of crumbs and greased paper, and one hard-boiled egg nobody wanted. Your husband goes forward along the train to find the luggage van. And here is the first decision of the holiday, and it costs money, and you have been thinking about it since Manchester. a porter will take your trunk from the van to the lodging house. He will want 6pence for it, possibly more if the house is up the hill. And he will expect the coin to be produced without discussion, because the man behind you in the queue is already producing his. Your husband could carry the trunk himself in stages with rests, sweating through the shirt he must wear again on Sunday. Or you could pay a boy with a barrow, which is 4pence and slower and slightly less respectable, in a way that everybody understands and nobody states. You watch a woman 2 carriages down decline a porter with a small shake of the head, and you watch the porter turn away from her without a flicker, because he has done this 500 times this week and knows the shake of the head at 100 paces. You take the porter not because you can comfortably afford 6pence, but because you have arrived, and because the first 10 minutes of a holiday set the tone of the whole week, and because a woman who arrives at a lodging house behind her own luggage on a barrow has told the landlady something about herself before either of them has spoken. That is what the 6pence buys. Not the carrying, the order of the procession. Outside the station, the light changes completely. It is white and flat, and comes from everywhere at once. Off the pavement, off the whitewashed fronts of the houses, off the sky, and it makes you squint like a woman coming out of a cellar. The air has salt in it, and something else underneath, weed and tar and horses and frying. Gulls are standing on the chimneys with the confidence of ratepayers, and the street in front of you is nothing but lodging houses. Terrace after terrace of them, 4 stories, bay windows, railings, all of them with a card in the ground floor glass. Apartments to let, board optional, every 3rd house, and then every 2nd, and then, as you walk, every single one. This is worth slowing down for, because the woman who is about to open the door to you is one of the most quietly remarkable commercial figures of the century, and almost nobody has ever written her down properly. The seaside landlady runs a business, not a household with lodgers in it. A business with a season, a capital investment, a pricing structure, staff, a bad debt problem, and a very short window in which to make an entire year's income. In a resort town of this period, a substantial share of the lodging houses are held in a woman's name and run by a woman's decisions, and a good many of those women are widows who took the house precisely because it was one of the very few commercial undertakings a respectable woman could enter without anybody objecting. It looks like housekeeping. It is legible as housekeeping. It is, in fact, a hospitality trade running at 100% occupancy for 8 weeks and near enough empty for the other 44, which is a harder thing to manage than most shops. She has bought coal in the spring at spring prices. She has had the front repainted because the card in the window is worth nothing if the paint is peeling. She has beds to fill from the beginning of July, and if she fails to fill them in the 3rd week of August, she does not get that week back, ever, and she will feel it in February. So when she opens the door and looks at you, she is not being unfriendly. She is doing arithmetic. The house you stop at is the 4th you try. The first 2 are full. The 3rd has a room. But the woman quotes a figure for the week that makes your husband's jaw move slightly, and you thank her and step back into the street, and neither of you says anything for 6 paces. The 4th is a little further from the front. This matters. Every street back from the sea takes something off the weekly rate, and the difference between a house on the parade and a house 3 streets behind it is not a small percentage. You are 3 streets behind. You have always been going to be 3 streets behind. You made your peace with that in Manchester in April. She takes you upstairs herself. She is perhaps 50, in black, with a bunch of keys and a manner that is courteous and entirely unhurried and gives away nothing whatever. Now, the arrangement. This is the part that people from later years get wrong most consistently, because they assume that renting a room at the seaside means what it means now. It does not. Under the apartment system, you are not buying meals. You are buying the room, and the use of it, and the labor of the kitchen. The food is yours. You go out in the morning to the shops and the market, and you buy your chops, and your bacon, and your bread, and your tea, and your butter, and you bring it back, and you hand it over, and she cooks it, and it comes up to your table at the hour you have asked for. Every family in the house does this. 6 or 7 separate lots of provisions in one kitchen, 6 or 7 meat dishes going into one oven, each one belonging to somebody, each one having to come out to the right room at the right time and not be confused with anybody else's. Some houses require you to mark your own provisions. Some hand you a labelled shelf in the larder. Some run entirely on the landlady's memory, which is formidable and is not a thing she is paid extra for, and she charges for the service. That is where the money actually sits. She names the rent for the rooms. Then, in the same even voice, with no change of tone at all, she names the rest. So much a week for cooking. So much for attendance. So much for the use of the cruet, which is to say, is the salt, and the pepper, and the vinegar, and the mustard, sitting on your table in a little stand, and if you use them, you pay for the stand by the week, whether you use them once or 20 times. Candles are extra. Coal, if you want a fire in the sitting room on a wet evening, is extra, and is measured by the scuttle. Boots cleaned, extra. Hot water above the usual, extra. None of this is dishonest. It is all written on a card, and she shows you the card. And the card is the reason she shows you the card. She has learned across many seasons that the argument on the last morning is always with the visitor who did not read the tariff on the first day. And she has decided to have that conversation now instead, politely, standing on the landing, while everyone is still pleased with everyone. You read it properly, which is not what your husband does, and you do a sum in your head that includes 7 days of cooking charge and 7 days of cruet and an assumption of 2 candles a night, and you arrive at a figure that is meaningfully above the rent she first quoted. That gap is where her season lives. Then you look at the room. There are 2. A sitting room at the front on the 2nd floor, with a table, 4 chairs, a horsehair sofa, a fender, and a mirror over the mantel, with a crack in the lower corner that has been there some time. And behind it, a bedroom, with an iron bedstead, a horsehair mattress you press with your thumb, and find exactly as unforgiving as you expected. A washstand with a jug and basin, and a strip of carpet. The children will go in the small room across the landing, all 3 of them, in one bed, which they will treat as an adventure for 2 nights and a grievance for 5. The window in the sitting room looks out across the roofs of the street in front, and between 2 chimneys, at an angle, if you stand rather to the left and lean, there is a wedge of grey moving water, perhaps as wide as your hand. A room with a proper sea view on the parade is another matter entirely in price. You are not paying for the sea. You are paying for a wedge of it, seen sideways, past somebody else's chimney, and you will find over the course of the week that you go and stand in that particular spot rather more often than you would ever admit to anybody. You settle the terms in the doorway. She says the rate. You ask whether it includes the cooking. She says it does not, and repeats the figure, and does not soften it, and does not apologize for it. And there is nothing to negotiate, because there are 3 families still on the pavement outside looking for beds, and both of you know it. You say that will do very well. She writes your name in a book, gives you the key, tells you the hour she serves supper and the hour she locks the front door, and goes back down the stairs. And then it is quiet, and the 4 of you are standing in a rented sitting room in a strange town. And the trunk arrives, and you begin, because it is what you do, to unpack it. You wake at something close to 5, because you always wake at something close to 5, and for a moment you do not know where you are. The light is wrong. That is the first thing. At home, the bedroom faces the back of another house across a narrow yard, and the morning arrives late and grey and second-hand, filtered through soot and brick. Here the light comes off water somewhere out of sight and bounces up under the ceiling in a way that makes the whitewash look faintly wet. It moves. That is the strangest part. There is a shifting quality to it, a slow ripple across the plaster above the bed. And you lie there for a full minute, working out that it is the sun on the sea, reflected up past the chimneys, and that you have never in your life woken in a room where the ceiling moved. The second thing is the birds. Gulls do not sound like any bird, you know. They sound like something being wrenched apart, over and over, at a great height, and then very close, and then on the roof directly above your head. One of them lands on the slates at 5:10 with a scrabble of claws, and you hear its whole weight settle. The third thing, and this is the one that unsettles you most, is that there is nothing you have to do. Consider what a morning normally is. You are awake before anyone, because the fire has to be laid and lit before the room is bearable, and the kettle has to be on, and the girl has to be got up and set to the grate, and the children's boots have to be found, and there is bread to cut, and a husband to see fed, and out of the door by 7:20. And by the time the front door closes behind him, you have already made perhaps 40 small decisions and issued a dozen instructions, and your day is properly begun. That is not a complaint. It is a shape. You have lived inside that shape for 11 years, and you know every corner of it in the dark. Here there is no grate that is yours. The landlady will have her range going already, 3 floors down, because she has 4 sets of lodgers to feed, and she was up before you. There is no bread to cut, because the bread is in her kitchen, and will come up when she brings it up. There is no girl to set to anything, because your girl is at home in Manchester, minding the empty house, and being paid rather less to do it. There is a jug of water on the washstand that somebody else filled. So you lie in a strange bed, in a rented room, and listen to a bird tearing the air apart above you, and you find that your hands do not know what to do with themselves, and that this is not entirely a pleasant feeling. It is closer to the sensation of missing a stair. By 7:30, the children have discovered the landing, and the novelty is over, and the day begins in the ordinary way after all. Breakfast comes up on a tray. Bread, butter, that you brought yourself, and that she has kept in her cool larder for you. Tea made with her water and her fire, and charged accordingly. Your husband reads a newspaper bought at the station and announces the tide times to nobody in particular, in the manner of a man who has held this information for 11 minutes and has not yet found a use for it. And then you dress, all of you, and this takes the better part of an hour, and you go out onto the parade. Here is the thing to understand about a Victorian promenade, because it is the thing the postcards never manage to convey. It is not a path along the sea. It is a long, narrow, open-air room with rules, and the rules are as precise as anything governing a drawing room at home, and everybody walking on it knows them, and nobody has written them down anywhere. You walk in one direction on one side, and the other direction on the other. You walk slowly. Walking quickly on a promenade announces that you have somewhere to be, and having somewhere to be announces that you are working. And the entire purpose of being on the promenade is to demonstrate that you are not. A woman hurrying along the parade at 11 in the morning is read instantly by everyone she passes as a servant on an errand or a landlady chasing a butcher's bill. The hour matters enormously. Before 9, the parade belongs to the early bathers, the invalids taking air on medical instruction, and the men who have come down alone for the sea and go back to the office on Monday. Between 10 and 12:30 is the general promenade, which is what you are doing, and which is the most crowded and the most watched. Between 3 and 5 it fills again, and this second promenade is more formal than the first, with better dresses and slower walking. The evening belongs mostly to young people and to bands. You are here in the middle of the morning with 3 children and a husband, which is precisely correct for what you are, and you know it is correct, and there is a small satisfaction in that which you would find difficult to explain to anybody who had not spent a decade learning it. Now, the beach. From the parade railing, it looks like one beach. Sand, water, a scatter of thousands of people, the bathing machines drawn up in ranks at the water's edge. It looks entirely democratic, and writers of the period frequently said so, usually with alarm. It is not one beach. It is 4 or 5 beaches laid end to end along the same stretch of sand, and the boundaries between them are invisible and absolutely rigid. And every single person on that sand knows exactly which stretch is theirs. At the north end, where the ground rises toward the better hotels and the private gardens, the sand is thinly occupied. There are bath chairs there, and nursemaids in uniform with 2 children rather than 5. And the bathing machines are cleaner and cost more and stand further apart. Those families have taken a house for the month or the season, not rooms for a week. Their trunks came separately. They do not carry anything. Below that, and this is where you are, is the great middle stretch. Clerks, small tradesmen, warehousemen, schoolmasters, chapel ministers, commercial travellers who have done well. Families of 4 and 5 and 6. Rooms taken by the week in a lodging house 2 streets back from the front. Sandwiches carried down in a basket. Somebody in every group holding a folded shawl and a jacket and a hat, because somebody else has gone into the water. Below that, again, toward the south, where the pier casts its shadow and the sand goes shingly, the ground belongs to the day people and the mill excursions. And on a Saturday, it is a solid mass, and on a Tuesday like this one, it is half empty and rather melancholy. Nobody enforces this. There is no rope. There is no sign. There is a system of glances, and it is entirely sufficient. And you are part of the system. You are at this moment standing at the railing with your hand on your youngest's shoulder, and you are conducting an assessment of every woman within 40 feet of you. And it is so automatic and so fast that you would deny doing it if asked. You read the dress first, not whether it is pretty, whether the material is this year's or has been turned and remade, whether the trimming is of a piece with the body of it or has been added to freshen an old thing, how much braid, and whether the braid is even, whether the skirt is carrying the fullness that the current line requires, because a skirt cut 2 seasons ago sits differently and everyone can see it. Then the hat, and then the boots, and the boots are the most honest article a person wears, because they cannot be borrowed or made over, and they show wear at a glance. Then the children, and their number, and whether they are wearing new boots or their brothers. Then, last, whether there is a servant with the party, and if so, what kind. It takes about 3 seconds and produces a very accurate figure for a household's annual income, and you are doing it to perhaps 9 women a minute, and every one of them is doing it to you. You are on this parade, on this Tuesday, comfortably in the middle, not near the top, not near the bottom. Your dress is last summer's, but it was good when it was bought, and it has been let out and taken in by a woman who knows what she is doing, which is to say by you. Your boots are sound. Your children have new boots, all 3, which cost more than it is comfortable to remember, and which is exactly why you bought them before you came. That is what the boots were for. You understood, in Manchester, in June, standing in a shop, that a week on this parade would be conducted largely below the knee. At the end of the parade, the pier. You pay at a turnstile at the shore end, and the charge is a penny for an adult, and often a halfpenny for a child. And for that penny, you buy the right to walk out over the sea on a deck of iron and timber for 1/3 of a mile, and to be, for 20 minutes, apparently at sea without having gone anywhere. That penny is doing a great deal of work. It is not really the price of the boards. It is a filter. A penny is nothing to the families at the north end of the beach, and it is a genuine consideration to a mill family down from Bolton for the day, with 4 children, and the pier company knows this with total precision, and the toll exists at least as much to shape the crowd as to fund the maintenance. Some piers charged 2pence on the days the excursion trains ran. That is not a subtle instrument. You pay for 5, and you walk out, and the boards are spaced so that you can see grey water sliding beneath your own feet, and your middle child will not walk on them at all for the first 30 yards. And then you are out past the breakers, with the town behind you laid flat and small, and the whole vast field of the sea in front. And the wind takes your hat, and you catch it. And for a moment nobody is looking at anybody. The next morning you go down to the sand early, because the tide is right at 9:30, and the tide is the only authority on this beach that nobody argues with. The bathing machines stand in a rank along the water's edge, like a row of small sheds that have wandered down from a farmyard and are considering the sea. There are perhaps 40 of them on this stretch. Each is a wooden hut, roughly 6 feet by 8, mounted on 4 iron-shod wheels tall enough that the axles clear the shallow water, with a door at either end and 2 or 3 steps folded up beneath. They are painted, most of them, in stripes, and the paint has been renewed at the start of the season and is already blistering at the corners where the salt gets in. You join the queue. This is the part nobody puts on a postcard. There are 11 women ahead of you, and one of them has 2 daughters, and the machines are being turned around at a rate of perhaps 1 every 20 minutes, and so you stand on damp sand in full dress with a bundle under your arm, and you wait the better part of an hour. Your eldest holds the bundle for a while, and then puts it down, and you pick it up again, because sand in wet flannel is a misery you have already been warned about by your sister-in-law, who came here 2 summers ago and speaks of it still. When your turn comes, you hand over the money. A bathing machine on this coast in the summer of 1878 costs somewhere between 6pence and a shilling, depending on the town, the hour, and whether a towel and a gown are included. And here it is 6pence for the machine, and 3pence more for the gown, and you have brought your own, so 6pence it is. You are given a numbered wooden tag. You climb the steps. The door shuts behind you. Here is the thing worth slowing down for, because it is the entire architecture of the practice. The bathing machine was not designed to change in. It was designed to make it impossible to be seen. Those are different problems, and only one of them is about privacy. Inside there is a bench, 2 brass hooks, a small high window with a slatted shutter, and no room whatever. You undress standing, bracing one hand against the boards, and the whole structure sways because it is a wooden box balanced on 4 wheels on a soft slope. You fold your dress on the bench because the floor is wet and gritty and will be wetter shortly. You put on the bathing costume. That costume deserves a moment of its own. It is made of flannel, which is to say wool, and it is very nearly the same weight of cloth you would wear in November. There is a bodice with sleeves to the elbow, and a skirt to the knee, and beneath it drawers gathered at the ankle, or just below the knee. And the whole thing is sometimes weighted at the hem with lead shot, or small buckram bands sewn into the seam, because the one thing the garment must not do, under any circumstances, is float upward in the water. Wool at the seaside seems perverse until you understand what the alternative was. Cotton and linen, when wet, go translucent and cling. Wool, when wet, does neither. It goes dark, it goes heavy, it goes shapeless, and shapeless was precisely the specification. A wet flannel bathing dress weighs somewhere between 8 and 12 pounds when it comes out of the sea. You will carry every ounce of that up the sand later. So, you are dressed in a swaying box, and now the box begins to move. Outside, a man has backed a horse into the shafts. He is paid by the machine proprietor, and he does this from the first tide to the last, walking a patient animal into cold salt water 40 or 50 times a day. And the horses on this beach have a particular resigned way of standing in the surf that you will remember afterward, better than most of what you see this week. The machine is drawn down the slope and out until the sea is at the level of the lower step, and then it stops, and the horse is unhitched and led back up, and you are left floating in a shed a dozen yards offshore, with the water knocking against the wheels. The seaward door is unbolted from outside. Above it, on the better machines, is a hood. The hood is a canvas awning on a hinged wooden frame, which folds down over the seaward steps and drops nearly to the water, so that you descend into the sea inside a canvas tent. The invention is usually credited to a Quaker named Benjamin Beale, a Margate man of the 1750s, and it is the single piece of equipment that made mixed public beaches possible at all, because it meant a woman could enter the water without being visible from the shore at any point in the process. And waiting for you at the bottom of the steps, standing waist-deep in the sea in her own soaked woolen skirts, is the dipper. You should know what you are looking at. She is a working woman, usually local, usually middle-aged or older, and she stands in cold water for 6 or 7 hours a day through the season. Her job is to take you by the arms, walk you out to the depth of your chest, and at the moment you are least expecting it, put you under. That is not a figure of speech. Immersion was the point. The medical theory of the day held that the benefit lay in the shock, the sudden cold on the whole body, and a bather who lowered herself gradually and stood shivering to the waist was understood to be wasting her sixpence. The dipper's professional skill was in timing that shock so that you did not have time to brace, and in getting you upright again immediately, and in doing this to a stranger 40 times a day, without either of you finding it undignified. Some of these women were locally famous. Brighton had one who worked the machines for decades and was known by name to half the town and left a small fortune when she stopped. It was one of a very short list of trades in which a working-class woman handled a lady of a higher station physically, gave her instructions, and was obeyed without argument. On the sand, 10 minutes earlier, you would not have exchanged a word. In the water, she has hold of your forearms, and she tells you when. She tells you now. You go under. The North Sea in July is around 60 degrees at the surface on a good afternoon, and rather less than that at 9:30 in the morning. The cold does not feel like cold at first. It feels like being struck. Your chest locks. Your hearing goes strange and muffled, and then loud again, and you come up gasping with your hair flat to your skull and salt in your nose, and the dipper has you by the arm and is saying something perfectly ordinary about the tide, and you laugh because there is nothing else your body will let you do. You stay in perhaps 10 minutes. Almost nobody swims. Swimming, as a stroke and a skill, is barely taught to women at this date, and the costume makes it close to impossible in any case. What you do is stand and jump with the swell and hold the rope that runs from the machine out to a moored buoy and let the water push you about. And this is the whole of it, and it is enough. And by the 4th minute, the cold has stopped being an assault and become something almost pleasant that you know you will regret later. There are rules governing all of this, and they are not suggestions. Bathing on most of this coast is segregated by sex, by local bylaw, with the women's machines at one end of the beach and the men's at the other, sometimes separated by 100 yards, sometimes by a headland. The bylaws specify the hours. They specify the minimum distance between machines of the opposite sex. They specify, in several towns, that no gentleman shall bathe from a machine within a stated number of yards of a machine occupied by a lady, and that costume shall be worn, which tells you something about what the men had been doing before the bylaw was thought necessary. The rules were enforced by the beach inspector, a paid municipal officer with a whistle, and rather more effectively by every other person on the sand who watched and remarked and remembered. They are also, in this decade, beginning to give way. Mixed bathing arrives in England slowly and against real opposition, and it arrives first because English families come back from the French coast, having seen husbands and wives in the water together, and found the sky did not fall. Some resorts permit it in stated areas by the 1890s. Others hold out into the new century. Where it is permitted, the bathing machine begins its long decline, because a machine drawn out to sea by a horse is an enormously expensive way to solve a problem that has ceased to exist. Within 35 years of this morning, most of these 40 huts will be sitting on the upper beach, with their wheels removed, rented out as changing rooms by the hour. But that is not this morning. The dipper walks you back to the steps. You climb up into the machine streaming and shut the door, and the horse is brought down and hitched, and you are hauled back up the slope while you attempt to peel 11 pounds of soaked wool off yourself in a moving box. That is the part nobody mentions. Getting out of a wet flannel bathing dress in a space the size of a wardrobe, with no purchase, while the floor tilts. The sleeves invert. The wet cloth grips your skin and refuses to slide. You get the bodice as far as your shoulders, and then simply stand for a moment, bent double, breathing, one hand flat on the wall, and then you get on with it, because there is a cue. You dry with a towel that is damp within seconds. You dress. Your hair is a lost cause and will stay a lost cause until evening, and there is salt drying white along your hairline that you will not discover for 2 hours. The landward door opens onto ordinary sand and ordinary noise. You step down, hand over the wooden tag, and gather up the children. And the bundle now weighs what a small dog weighs, and drips steadily onto your skirt as you walk, leaving a dark line all the way up the beach. And your face is warm, and your chest is loose, and you feel, for the first time since March, entirely awake. That feeling has a theory behind it, and the theory is older than the town. Here is something worth slowing down for, because the sea you have just been dipped in is not, in 1878, primarily understood as a pleasure. It is understood as a treatment. The whole apparatus you queued for this morning, the huts and the horse and the woman paid to hold you under, descends directly from a medical argument made by physicians more than 100 years before you were born. The argument began, roughly in the 1730s, when an English doctor named Richard Russell published a treatise recommending seawater for a long list of complaints, to be taken both externally and, alarmingly, internally. He set up practice at a small fishing village on the Sussex coast, and his fashionable patients followed him there, and the fishing village became Brighton. That is not a folk story. It is more or less the documented commercial origin of the English seaside resort. A doctor decided salt water was medicine. Wealthy people believed him, and a coastline of towns grew up around the belief. What Russell and his successors were actually prescribing was shock. The point of immersion was not to swim. Swimming, as a leisure activity, barely existed for women of your class, and would not be widely taught to them for another generation. The point was the cold. The sudden plunge was thought to tighten the fibers of the body, drive the blood inward toward the vital organs, and then produce a healthy reaction as it flooded back to the surface. This is why the dipper exists at all. A patient left to herself will hesitate, and hesitation ruins the treatment. She is there to make certain the shock is complete and instantaneous. She is not a lifeguard. She is closer to a nurse administering a dose. By your century, the language has shifted. The word your husband uses, the word the newspapers use, the word printed on the advertising cards that a Manchester railway company pastes up at the station in April, is ozone. Ozone had been identified as a distinct substance in the 1840s, and by the 60s and 70s, it had been thoroughly absorbed into popular medicine in a way that had very little to do with what it actually is. The seaside smell, that sharp mineral edge on the wind that you noticed the moment you stepped off the train, was believed to be ozone, and ozone was believed to be a purifying agent, a kind of atmospheric tonic. Resort towns advertised themselves on the strength of it. Bracing, the guidebooks say of the East Coast. Relaxing, they say of the South. Both words are doing medical work. We now know the smell is mostly a compound produced by marine algae and bacteria, and that it is not doing anything for anyone's lungs. But this is one of those cases where the wrong explanation attached itself to a real effect, and the real effect kept the wrong explanation alive for 80 years. Because something does happen to your children here, and you can see it. Your youngest has been narrow through the shoulders since Christmas. Not ill, exactly. Not confined, not attended by anyone but the ordinary parish doctor, who looked at him in February for a shilling, and said what such men usually said, which was air. Sea air, if it could be managed. Country air, if it could not. Failing both, a window open in the mornings regardless of the weather. You have thought about that word, air, more than the doctor probably intended. Manchester, in 1878, burns coal for everything. It burns coal to spin cotton, to weave it, to move it, to light the streets, to warm every room in every terrace, and the result is a sky that has a colour rather than a clarity. In winter, the smoke sits low over the valley and does not leave for days. Washing, hung out on a Monday, comes in grey. The stone of the buildings is black within 20 years of being laid, and everyone knows it, and nobody in your lifetime has been able to do a single practical thing about it, because the smoke and the wages come from the same chimneys. So what a week at the coast actually gives your son is not ozone. It is the absence of soot. It is 7 days of breathing air that has crossed 200 miles of open water instead of 4 miles of chimney tops. It is also, and this matters at least as much, 7 days of running. That is the part the medical theory undersold, and the mothers understood perfectly. At home, he plays in a paved yard, 9 feet by 11, walled, shared, with a privy at one end. Here he has 3 miles of flat, wet sand, and no walls at all. And he has been on it since 9:30, and he has not stopped once. And he is currently attempting to dam a channel of tide water with a wooden spade against odds that are entirely against him. You sit up on the dry sand with your skirt spread and your boots off, which is a thing you would not do anywhere else on earth, and you watch him. The town, meanwhile, is built to take this belief seriously in ways that go well beyond your family. Along the upper parade, there are boarding houses that advertise themselves specifically for the delicate, and they are not being coy. There is a genuine trade here, substantial and year-round, in convalescence. It works like this. A doctor in an inland city tells a patient of moderate means that a change of air is required for some weeks or some months. That patient does not go to a hospital, because hospitals in 1878 are largely institutions for the poor, and people of your station and above are treated at home. So the patient goes to the coast and lives in rooms and is looked after by a landlady who has made a specialty of exactly this. Some of these houses keep a resident nurse. Some keep a standing arrangement with a local physician. The advertisements in the back of the guidebook use a careful vocabulary: quiet situation, southerly aspect, sheltered from the east wind, invalid diet if required, and every phrase in it is a selling point aimed at a doctor's instructions. You have seen the results of this trade all morning without quite registering it. The bath chairs, for one. There are perhaps a dozen working the promenade, wicker-bodied, three-wheeled, with a folding hood, each pushed or drawn by a man who does nothing else for a living, and who charges by the hour and by the distance. They move at walking pace along the flattest section of the parade, and inside them sit people wrapped in rugs in August, taking their prescribed hour of air. There is a rank of them near the pier entrance, the way there is a rank of cabs at a railway station. The town has a by-law fixing their charges. That tells you the trade is not incidental. Nobody writes a by-law about something that happens twice a summer, and the sheer number of towns competing for this business explains a good deal about why the English coast looks the way it does. Once the railways arrived, a fishing village with a decent beach and a doctor willing to write a testimonial could reinvent itself inside 20 years. It built a promenade so the delicate could walk on level ground. It built a pier so they could take the air over open water without a boat. It built shelters facing away from the prevailing wind, and gardens and a bandstand, and it printed a guidebook full of the word bracing, and it waited for the trains. Whether any of it cured anyone is a harder question than the guidebooks allow. A man with a chronic complaint of the lungs is not going to be mended by 3 weeks at Scarborough, and the doctors who sent him mostly knew it. What the coast could genuinely offer was rest, better food than a sick room usually provided, sunlight and air without soot in it. For a child who had spent 5 months indoors in a smoke valley, that combination was not nothing. It simply was not what anybody claimed it was. Late in the afternoon, when the tide has gone far enough out that the children are 300 yards away and shouting, you go up to the rooms to write home. You write on the small table by the window, with the sash pushed up, because you have discovered that the landlady's front room is the only place in this house where you can hear the sea properly. You are writing to your sister in Salford, who has 4 children of her own and no prospect of a week anywhere, and you are aware of that while you write, and you adjust accordingly. You tell her the journey was long and the compartment was full. You tell her the rooms are clean and the mattress is honest, which is more than can be said of the last house you tried 3 years ago. You tell her what the butter costs here, because she will want to know. And because it is a genuine outrage, you do not mention the shilling for the bathing machine. Then you tell her about the boy. You write that he has eaten everything put in front of him since Tuesday, including fish, which he has never once eaten at home. You write that he sleeps from 8 in the evening until 7 in the morning without stirring, which he has not done since he was a baby. You write that there is color in his face, and you write it plainly, without decorating it, because you know she will read that one sentence 4 times. You do not write that you have been counting, that you have watched him going up the beach ahead of you for 4 days now, and measured the distance he covers before he stops, and that on Monday it was short of the groin, and today it was well past it. You do not put that on paper. It would look like superstition, and you are not certain it is not. You blot the letter, and fold it, and address it, and set it against the candlestick to be posted in the morning. Outside, the light has gone long and yellow across the wet sand, and the tide has turned, and somewhere down there 3 children who will refuse to come in are ignoring you at a considerable distance. Wednesday evening, after the children are asleep, and the room has gone quiet enough to hear the sea, you take out the small notebook you have carried since the day you were married, and you find that the week has gone wrong. Not badly wrong. Not the kind of wrong that ends a holiday early, or requires a letter to your husband's brother, but wrong in the way that matters to a household that lives inside a fixed income, which is to say wrong by about 11 shillings, 4 days in, with 3 days still to run. You do the sum twice. The second time, you do it in the other direction, adding upward from the smallest amounts, because you learned years ago that a mistake made going down the column is rarely repeated going up it. The answer does not change. You have spent, since Saturday, considerably more than you allowed for, and the largest part of the excess is not the pier, and not the bathing machine, and not the 2 pennies you weakened on for a bag of shrimps on Monday. The largest part of the excess is food. This is worth slowing down for, because the price of butter at the seaside is one of the small, unglamorous facts that explains more about the Victorian holiday than any photograph of a bathing machine ever will. At home in Manchester, in the summer of 1878, you buy fresh butter at somewhere between 11 pence and 13 pence the pound, depending on the shop and the week, and whether you are willing to take the salted sort. You know this the way you know the sound of your own front door. Here, in a resort town in the 3rd week of the season, the same pound of butter is 15 pence, and on Monday, in the shop nearest the promenade, it was 16. Milk at home is 3 pence the quart. Here it is 4 pence, and the quart is not, you strongly suspect, an honest quart. Bread has risen by a halfpenny on the loaf. Eggs, which ought to be cheap in a place surrounded by farmland, are dearer than they are in a city built of brick and smoke, and the reason is simply that every one of them can be sold twice over between June and September. None of this is fraud. It is arithmetic. A town of perhaps 12,000 people takes in, across a summer, some hundreds of thousands of visitors, and every one of those visitors must be fed from the same shops, supplied along the same rail line, by the same handful of dealers. demand climbs. Supply does not climb with it, and the price finds its level. The shopkeepers of the town make in 14 weeks what must carry them through the other 38, and they know precisely how long you are staying, and they know that you cannot go home for cheaper bread. You knew this before you came. You allowed for it. What you did not allow for correctly was the appetite of 3 children who spend 9 hours a day in salt air and cold water, and who are eating, all 3 of them, like men at harvest. Your youngest, who at home has to be coaxed through half a slice of bread and dripping, ate 2 boiled eggs and most of a loaf on Tuesday morning, and asked, without any apparent embarrassment, whether there was more. You would not stop him for anything in the world. That is precisely what you came for. But it costs. And then, beneath the food, there are the other charges, and these are the ones that make you set down the pencil and press the heels of your hands against your eyes for a moment. Understand how the apartment system actually works, because the bill it produces bears very little resemblance to what a modern ear expects. You did not book a hotel. You rented rooms. The rooms, at 19 shillings the week for the pair of them, were agreed on Saturday and written on the tariff card, and are not in dispute. What is in dispute, or rather, what is not in dispute but is nonetheless accumulating, is everything that surrounds the rooms. You buy your own food. The landlady cooks it. For cooking it, she charges. That charge may be reckoned at so much per person per day, or so much on the joint, or a flat sum for the week. And in this house, it is 1 shilling and 6pence the week for the family, which is fair, and was stated plainly. Then there is the use of the cruet, which is to say, the small stand, holding salt, pepper, mustard, oil, and vinegar, and which is charged at 6pence the week whether you use the vinegar or not. There is the charge for kitchen fire, which appears whether the day is cold or blazing. There is the charge for candles, reckoned by the candle, and you have used more candles than you meant to, because your middle child will not settle in a strange room in the dark. There is a charge for boots cleaned, which you did not ask for, and which was done anyway on Sunday morning, and which you will pay, because arguing about a boy's boots is beneath the dignity of everybody concerned. 6pence here, 4pence there, 1 shilling for the week for the cruet and the fire between them. Individually, each of these is nothing. Collectively, across 7 days, they are a meaningful fraction of the rent itself, and it is entirely possible to arrive at the end of a holiday, having paid, in extras, something close to 1/3 again of what you believed the rooms cost. The comic papers make jokes about this. There is a whole genre of them. The landlady's bill unrolling across the floor like a bolt of cloth, the item for the use of the corkscrew, the item for looking out of the window. The jokes exist because the arrangement was universal, and universally resented, and universally accepted, all at once, by hundreds of thousands of people every summer. And here is the part that the comic papers get wrong. The extras are not greed. They are the business model. 19 shillings the week for 2 furnished rooms sounds like a great deal of money. And it is a great deal of money until you divide it across the year. This house is full for perhaps 14 weeks. For the remaining 38, it is a house with too many bedrooms in a town with no trade. Out of the season's takings must come the rates, the coal, the repairs, the linen, the replacement of everything that 100 strangers' children break, and the living of the woman who runs it, and whatever family she has. The rooms alone do not carry it. The sixpences do. You know this. That is the difficulty. So on Thursday morning, after the children have gone down to the sand, and before the landlady begins the middle of the day cooking, you go and stand in her hallway with the notebook in your hand, and you have the conversation. It is conducted entirely in courtesy. You do not accuse her of anything, because she has done nothing, and because to accuse her would be to lose the whole encounter in the first sentence. You say that you find you have been a little heavier on the candles than you intended, and you wonder whether it might be reckoned by the week rather than by the candle, which is a way of asking for a reduction without using the word. She stands with her hands folded in front of her apron. She is perhaps 50. She has had this conversation, you would guess, 400 times, and she has a face that gives away precisely nothing while she considers it. She says that she can do the candles by the week. She says it as though it costs her nothing, and it very nearly does, and you both know the value of what has just been given, which is not the 9p. The value is that a bargain has been struck without either of you having to say that a bargain was needed. Then she says, without being asked, that she is getting her milk from a man at the top of the town who is cheaper than the shop on the front, and that if you leave a can out on the step of an evening, she will have him fill it with yours. And she mentions, not looking at you, that the fishmonger on the back street sells what is left at 4 o'clock for less than half, and that a good many of her ladies go down at 4. You thank her. She says it is nothing at all. 2 women, standing 8 feet apart in a narrow hallway that smells of soap and yesterday's cooking. One of you is paying, and one of you is earning, and the distance between your stations is so small that a shift in either direction over the last 20 years might have reversed you entirely. Her husband, if there was one, may have been a clerk very like yours. Your own mother took in sewing for a while, in a bad winter, and you have never once mentioned it in this town. Neither of you will ever refer to any of that. What you will do instead is this. You will be perfectly polite to one another for 3 more days. You will pay the bill in full on Saturday morning, without querying a single line of it, and she will find, when you have gone, that the rooms have been left tidier than she expected, because you would not for anything have her think that a family from Manchester does not know how to leave a room. You go back up the stairs, you sit down at the little table by the window, and you take up the pencil again, and you write in the column the words fish at 4, and beneath it milk from the can, and you work the sum through one more time with the new figures in it. It comes out at 4 shillings and 3p to the good over 3 days, which is not enough to fix the week. But it is enough to mean you will not go home short, and it is enough that when your eldest asks tomorrow for a ride on the sands, you will be able to say yes without doing arithmetic first, and that you have come to understand over 11 years of marriage is very nearly the whole of what money is for. The afternoon after that is warm in a way the whole week has not been, and by 2 o'clock the sands below the promenade have filled up in that particular way a beach fills, not evenly, but in clots, a knot of people here, a wide, empty stretch there, and then another knot, each one gathered around something you cannot yet see. You take the children down. Your youngest wants to be carried the last part of the slope, and you carry her, because she weighs less than she should, and because the sand slides under your boots, and it is easier than watching her fall. Your eldest goes ahead with his brother, and you let him, and you keep the two dark heads in view the way you have kept them in view all week, which is to say, constantly, without appearing to. The nearest knot of people is around a wooden frame no taller than a doorway, striped in red and white canvas, with a small stage at head height and a puppet leaning over the front of it, shouting in a voice that is not a voice at all, but a sort of shrieking squawk. Your boys have already stopped. Perhaps 40 people stand in a loose half-circle, most of them children sitting straight down on the sand, the adults behind them, and every so often the whole half-circle makes a noise together. The show has been going, in one form or another, for well over a century by the summer you are standing there. The puppet's squawk comes from a small metal and tape device the operator holds in his mouth, hidden behind the canvas. And the trick of it is not the voice, but the fact that he can produce the voice and speak ordinary dialogue and manage two puppets at once, all while crouched inside a hot striped box on a beach in July. He works the whole season here. In winter, he will work somewhere else, or he will do something else entirely, because the seaside trade is savagely seasonal, and a man who lives by it is unemployed for 7 months of the year. Here is the part of it that matters to you, standing at the back with a child on your hip. He does not charge admission. He cannot. There is no door, no gate, no way to enclose a patch of open sand. What he does instead is perform for 20 minutes to whoever gathers. And then, at the moment the crowd is most pleased and least able to slip away without appearing mean, his assistant, a boy of about 12, possibly his son, comes round the half-circle with a cloth cap held out in both hands. This is the economy of the whole beach, and once you have seen it, you will see it everywhere for the rest of the week. Nobody down here is selling a thing. They are selling a feeling, and then collecting on it afterwards, and the entire art of the trade is in the timing of the cap. You give a penny. You give a penny because your boys have been laughing for a quarter of an hour, and because the woman beside you has just given 2p, and because the cost of not giving, socially, in a crowd where everyone can see everyone's hands, is higher than a penny. That last calculation is the one the man in the striped box is really working with. He is not paid for the performance. He is paid for the awkwardness of standing among strangers when the cap comes round. Further along, there is a band. 6 or 7 men in dark uniform coats with brass instruments, playing a waltz slightly too fast, standing in a semicircle on the sand with their cases open in front of them. Bands like this were a fixture of English resort towns and English city streets both, and a great many of the players were German, migrant musicians who came over in organized groups, worked the summer coast and the winter towns, and sent money home. Some were very good. Some were emphatically not. The complaints in the newspapers about street bands are constant through these decades, and are almost always about noise rather than quality, which tells you something about how much of the sound of a Victorian resort was simply competing sound, all day, one performer's pitch cutting across another's. Beyond the band, on a raised patch near the sea wall, a troop of 8 men in matching striped blazers and straw hats is performing a program of comic songs and sentimental ballads with banjos and bones and a small concertina. They are a minstrel troupe, which is what nearly all such beach companies were in the 1870s, an imported American entertainment format that had become, by this decade, the standard shape of open-air seaside comedy in England. They play twice in the afternoon and once in the early evening. Their takings, like the puppet man's, arrive in a hat, though a successful troupe on a good beach in a good season could clear more than a skilled tradesman's wages between them, and the better companies eventually rented pitches from the town and set out folding chairs and charged 2p for a seat. That is the arc the whole beach is on, in fact, across your lifetime. It begins as free performance funded by a past hat, and it ends, by the time your grandchildren are grown, as ticketed pavilions and enclosed piers with turnstiles. The open sand was the last place in England where you could watch something good without paying first, and the resort corporations spent 40 years working out how to close it. You move the children along. They have already asked for 3 things. The first was the toffee. The second was a ride on one of the donkeys, which stand in a patient line near the steps, with a man beside them holding a switch he uses on nobody, and which cost a penny for a walk to the groin and back. The third was the photographer. The photographer's booth is a wooden hut with a painted backdrop showing a ship at sea, which is a curious thing to paint on a beach where the actual sea is 30 yards away, and considerably more convincing. He is doing wet plate work, or possibly the newer dry plates, which by this year are beginning to reach commercial operators, and which cut the sitting time down considerably. Either way, the process requires you to sit still, and a portrait of a family with 3 children under 11 is therefore a small feat of engineering involving a headrest, a great deal of coaxing, and a certain amount of luck. He charges 1 shilling for a single small print mounted on card. For 2 shillings and 6p, you may have a larger one and a duplicate. You stand outside the hut and you do the sum, and the sum is not really about a shilling. A shilling is what you paid on Tuesday for the bathing machine. A shilling is a fifth of what the lodging costs you per night for the rooms alone. A shilling is what your servant at home is paid for about a day and a half of work, and you know that figure precisely because you set it. Against your husband's roughly £200 a year, it is nothing at all. 1/8% of a week's income, and against the actual state of your accounts on the Thursday of a week that has already gone wrong by more than you admitted to him in Tuesday's letter, it is a real decision. What you are buying, if you buy it, is not a photograph. It is proof. Understand what the middle-class household of 1878 has, by way of evidence that its life has been well conducted. It has a marriage certificate. It has, if it is fortunate, a family Bible with dates written in the front. It has whatever the wife can remember and tell. And it has, increasingly, since the price of photography began to fall through the 1860s, a small number of hard rectangles of card, each of which says, "This happened, these were the faces, we were the sort of people who went." That last clause is doing most of the work. The seaside photograph is not primarily a memory. It is a claim about station, produced at the site of the claim, and brought home to be set on a mantelpiece in an inland city where a great many families have not been to the sea at all. You buy the shilling print. You do not buy the duplicate. The same logic, in cheaper form, governs everything in the little shops along the front, and you walk the children past all of it on the way back up. There are boxes covered in glued shells in patterns, made in workshops in the town over the winter by women and girls working piecework. There are jars and pin cushions and cheap glass paperweights with a printed view of the pier inside. There are mugs with the name of the town in gold. And there is the rock, sticks of hard-boiled sugar with the town's name running the whole length in coloured letters. A confectioner's trick of building the lettering into a great cylinder of hot sugar and drawing it out thin so the name survives at every point along it. None of these things are of any use. That is precisely the point of them. Every single object in that window exists to be carried inland and displayed, and what it displays is not the seaside, but the fact of your having been there, which is why the town's name is on all of it in letters you can read across a room. The trade calls it souvenir. What is actually being manufactured in workshops behind the front, at wages of a few shillings a week, is memory in a form that can be shown to the neighbours. You buy 2 sticks of rock and break one in half, so there are 3 pieces. Your middle boy asks whether they can go back tomorrow to see the men in the striped blazers again. And you say that you will see, which he correctly understands to mean probably. And your eldest, who is 11 and has begun in the last year to notice the shape of things, asks how much the man in the box gets from the cap. You tell him you do not know, which is true, but you have watched the cap go round twice now, and you have a fair idea of the crowd, and you have spent 11 years costing out other people's lives against your own. And by the time you reach the top of the steps, you have worked out, without meaning to, roughly what that man takes in an afternoon, and roughly how many afternoons are left in his summer, and roughly what he does in February. Saturday begins with a sound you have not heard on any other morning of this week, and it reaches you before you are properly awake. It is the sound of a train whistle, and then another, and then a third close behind it, and the 3 of them overlapping in the still air above the roofs, like something being announced. You lie for a moment and count. At home, you know the mill whistles by their pitch, and you know what hour each one means. Here you know nothing, and the whistles keep coming. And by the time you have washed and dressed and got the children into their boots, there have been 6 of them, and the street below the window has changed its character entirely. The excursion trains have arrived. Here is what a resort town is actually doing every summer, and it is doing 2 contradictory things at once. It is selling itself to people like you, who come for a week, who take rooms, who pay a landlady by the day, and eat in her house, and buy their bread from her neighbour, and their bathing from the machine proprietor on the sand. And it is also selling itself to people who come for 11 hours, who arrive at 8:30 in the morning and leave at 7:30 in the evening, and who in that time will spend perhaps 2 shillings each in the town, if the town is lucky, and the weather holds. The two markets do not like each other, and the town needs both. The week-long visitor is worth far more per head. A family in lodgings might leave £4 or £5 behind them in 7 days, counting rail fare paid to the railway rather than the town, counting rooms and food and the pier toll and the machines and the entertainments and the shell box and the rock. The day tripper leaves the price of a dinner, a pint of ale, a ride on something, and a stick of rock for the child at home. But the day tripper arrives in tens of thousands, and he arrives on a single day, and on that day the pier gate takes more pennies in 3 hours than it takes in the whole of a wet Tuesday. So the resort courts the excursion, and the resort resents the excursion, and both of these are visible from your window in the first half hour of the morning. You can see it in the shop fronts. The confectioner who yesterday had a modest tray of rock in his window has this morning banked the whole window with it, and put a boy outside the door, and chalked a price on a board. The photographer has moved his booth 10 yards nearer the head of the steps. The man with the donkeys has brought down 4 more donkeys from somewhere, and has an assistant with him who was not there on Thursday. Everyone who sells anything at all has read the timetable and knows exactly what is coming up the road from the station, and has arranged the front of their premises accordingly. And you can also see it in the lodging houses along the terrace, where 2 of the landladies have this morning drawn their front curtains half across, which is not for the light. It is a small statement. It says that this house is let for the season to families of a certain sort, and does not require passing custom, and would prefer not to be looked into. Your own landlady has done neither. She has swept her step, as she does every morning, and gone back inside. By 10 o'clock, the promenade is not a promenade. It is a river. You take the children out because you have promised to, and because a week at the sea in which you sit indoors on the busiest day of it is not a week you can describe afterwards, and because your youngest has been asking since Wednesday to see the whole length of the pier, and you have been putting it off. So the 5 of you go down the steps into a crowd that has the density of a market street, and none of the direction. And within 20 yards, you have taken your youngest by the wrist rather than the hand, which is a different grip, and both of you know it. The people around you are not, on the whole, unlike you. That is the thing worth being honest about. They are mill hands and warehousemen, and their wives, from Bolton and Oldham and Preston and Rochdale, wearing the clothes they wear to chapel, because these are the clothes a person wears to go somewhere. The men are in dark suits that are far too warm for the day, and will not be taken off, because taking the coat off in public is not done. And so they walk the front sweating in wool with their collars up and their hats on. The women have hats trimmed for the occasion. Nearly everybody has a paper parcel. You are wearing better cloth than most of them, and worse cloth than some, and this is a distinction that matters to you a great deal more this morning than it did yesterday. And you are aware of that, and you are not entirely comfortable with being aware of it, because the distance between your household and these households is not large. Your husband earns his £200 a year in a warehouse office, and the man beside you at the railing may well take 30 shillings a week in a spinning room, which comes to something like £78. And yes, that is a real difference, and it buys a servant and a parlour and the school fees. But it is a difference of degree. It is not a difference of kind. You come from the same city. You buy from some of the same shops. His wife and you would recognize the same tram. The distinction is that you are here for 7 days, and she is here for 11 hours, and the whole apparatus of the town has arranged itself to make that distinction legible. The pier is where it becomes hardest to ignore. You pay your pennies at the toll gate, which has 3 men working it this morning instead of 1, and you go through, and the deck of the pier is packed from rail to rail, with people moving slowly in both directions at once. The boards are hot. The gaps between them show green water a long way down, and your youngest wants to look through every gap and must be moved along. Halfway out there is a bottleneck where a photographer has set his camera, and a queue has formed across the width of the pier, and the 2 streams of people have to negotiate their way past each other, and everybody is polite about it, and everybody is slightly on edge. You count your children twice in the space of a minute. Then you do it again at the pier head, and again coming back. And by the time you are ashore, you have counted 4 times in 20 minutes, and your shoulders have come up somewhere near your ears. Nobody polices this crowd. That is the part that would surprise a modern eye. There are perhaps a handful of constables in the whole town, and they are concerned with drink, and with pickpockets, and with the lodging houses at the far end, and they are not concerned with how anybody behaves on the sand. What polices this crowd is the crowd. A young man who has had too much beer by noon is not arrested. He is looked at. He is looked at by 3 older women near the shelter, and by a man his own age who says something short to him, and by his own sister who takes his arm and steers him along the front and out of the general view, because what is at stake is not the law. What is at stake is whether the party he came with can be seen to be respectable, and respectability in this crowd is not a private possession. It is held collectively. One man in a group who cannot hold himself upright makes the whole group into something the terrace can point at, and everyone in that group knows it. And so the correction comes from inside. It works in the small things too. Nobody removes a coat. Nobody sits on the steps if there is a bench. Children are told to stop running, not because running is dangerous, but because it is noticed. The women keep their hats on in a wind strong enough to make that genuinely difficult, and they keep them on all day because a woman on a promenade with her head uncovered is a woman who has come to the seaside and forgotten herself, and the whole point of the day is that you can go to the seaside and not forget yourself. That is what makes it a holiday rather than an escape. You know this because you are doing it. You have been standing in full sun for an hour and a half in a bodice that fastens to the throat, and you have not loosened a single button, and it has not occurred to you to. By 2 o'clock, you have had enough. You take the children back up the steps and along the terrace and in through your landlady's door, and the noise drops by half the moment it shuts behind you, and you send the 3 of them up to the room to eat what is left of the morning's bread with a scrape of butter, and you follow them up and open the window and sit down beside it. And from up here it is a completely different thing. From the second floor, the crowd stops being a press of bodies and becomes a pattern. You can see where it thickens at the pier gate and where it thins at the north end, and how it moves in slow eddies around the fixed points of the donkeys. The photographer, the ice stand, the man with the telescope. You can see the tide, which has come in a long way since morning and pushed everybody up the sand into a narrower band. You can see the trains of the afternoon standing at the station beyond the roofs with steam over them, waiting. You sit with your elbows on the sill and your chin on your hands, which is not a posture you would adopt downstairs. Somebody in the crowd has a concertina. The sound of it comes up in pieces, cut apart by the wind, and never quite becomes a tune. The last morning arrives grey, which is a mercy, because it makes leaving easier. You wake before the children and lie still for a moment, listening to the gulls, which you have stopped hearing over the course of the week, and can hear again now that you know you are about to lose them. Then you get up, and you begin the work that has been waiting since the day you arrived. The trunk comes out from under the bed. It has been under there for 6 days, collecting a fine grit that has got everywhere, into the hinges, into the lining, into the corners where the leather straps are stitched down. You wipe what you can with a cloth and give up on the rest. Sand is the great fact of the return journey. It is in the seams of the children's stockings. It is inside the boots, which no amount of banging against the wall will empty entirely. It is in the folds of the flannel bathing costume, which has been drying over the back of a chair for 2 days and is still faintly damp at the thickest part of the hem, and which you fold anyway, because it has to go somewhere. It is in your hairbrush. It will still be turning up in October, in a pocket, in a book, and each time it does, you will stop for a second and be pleased. You pack in the reverse of the order you unpacked, which is the only way to do it. Sunday clothes at the bottom, worn things above, the things you will need on the train, right at the top, where you can reach them without opening the whole trunk on a platform. The children are put to work, which is less about their usefulness than about keeping them where you can see them. Your eldest is given the job of collecting everything from under the beds. Your middle one is set to pairing boots. Your youngest is given nothing and sits on the trunk lid to hold it down, which is a real job when the time comes. 8:30, and the room is stripped back to what it was when you first stood in the doorway and thought about the horsehair mattress. The washstand cleared, the chairs pushed back against the wall, the little shelf empty, except for a shell your middle child has put there and forgotten and will remember at the station, and will not stop talking about for an hour. You look at it for a moment before you go down. 6 days. It looks like nobody was ever here. Then comes the bill. Your landlady has it ready in the front room, written out in a hand that is better than you expected, and she stands with her arms folded while you read it, because that is the correct posture for the transaction, and you both know it. You read it slowly. You read every line. The rent for the rooms, agreed at the door on the first day, which is the only figure on the paper that cannot surprise you. The cooking, the cruet, the candles itemized by the number burned, the use of the kitchen fire on the day it rained, a charge for the extra hot water on Thursday, a charge for the boots being cleaned, which you did not ask for, and which your husband did ask for on the Wednesday. Without telling you, you go down the column and add it in your head. And then you add it again on your fingers against the edge of the paper because you do not entirely trust yourself in front of her. And the figure she has written at the bottom is correct. That is worth stopping on, because it is not nothing. She has not overcharged you. The whole apparatus of grumbling about seaside landladies, which fills the comic papers for 30 years and produces cartoon after cartoon of a fat woman with a ledger and a thin family with empty pockets, rests on the idea that the arithmetic is dishonest. Very often, the arithmetic is entirely honest. What people are actually objecting to is that it exists at all. They have come away to feel unbounded for a week, and they are handed a document proving that every hour of it was counted. You pay in coin, out of the purse you have kept in the trunk under the folded shawls, and it takes most of what is left. Then there is the tipping question, which is the worst part of the entire week, worse than the bathing machine, worse than the crowd. Nothing about it is written down anywhere. There is no tariff for it, and no notice on the wall. There is only the servant girl who has carried your hot water up 2 flights every morning at 7, and who is standing now in the passage by the coat pegs, not asking for anything, not quite meeting your eye, perfectly positioned. If you give her nothing, you have been mean, and she will say so downstairs the moment you are out of the door, and your landlady will remember it if you ever come back. If you give her too much, you have given away money you cannot spare in order to buy the good opinion of somebody you will never see again. You give her a shilling. You feel it leave your hand, and you feel for about 4 seconds the entire structure of your position in the world, which is that you are a woman with a servant of her own at home and no money in her purse at all, and that both of those things are true at the same time, and that the second one is the reason the first one has to be maintained so carefully. She says, "Thank you, ma'am." She means it, more or less. It is a shilling. The porter is refused, again, for the last time, and the trunk goes down the front steps on your husband's shoulder, and your eldest boy's hands underneath it doing very little, and the 3 of you and the 3 of them go up the street toward the station with the sea behind you. You do not look back at it. You mean to. You have thought about doing it. But the youngest drops a glove at the corner, and by the time that is dealt with, the road has turned, and there are houses in the way. And that is that, and you have seen your last of the sea for the year, without noticing it happen. Here is the whole of it, then, since we have been counting all week. The return fares, excursion rate, 2 adults and 3 children, with the youngest at half. The lodgings for 6 nights at the agreed rate for the rooms, the extras on the landlady's bill, the food you bought in the town at in-season prices, and the tinned things you carried from home to avoid buying more of it. The bathing machines, twice, the pier tolls, the photographer, the rock and the shell box and the donkeys, the shilling to the girl in the passage, the cab you did not take, the gloves that were lost, somewhere between £5 and £6, all told, against a household income of a little over £200 a year. Call it a fortnight of your husband's salary, spent in 7 days, deliberately, by plan. saved for since the previous autumn in a tin on the top shelf of the kitchen dresser. And what does it buy? It buys a measurable thing, which is that your youngest has colour in her face for the first time since February, and has eaten this week like somebody who intends to keep growing. Whether that is the ozone or the sunlight, or simply 6 days of not breathing. Manchester is not a question anybody in 1878 can answer properly, and it does not matter to you in the slightest, because you have seen the child. It buys a position, which is that when the question is asked in September, and it will be asked by the woman 2 doors along, and by your sister-in-law, and by the wives of the other men at the warehouse, you will be able to say where you went and for how long, and the answer will place your family exactly where you have worked for 11 months to place it, not showily, just accurately, and it buys the year's supply of talk. A holiday is a stock of material. It will be drawn on all winter, in the kitchen and over the mending, and on Sunday afternoons, when there is nothing else, and the story of the concertina, and the story of the donkey that would not move, and the story of the woman at the next table who complained about the fish, will all be told again, and improved, and told again. Now the part that has to be said plainly, because you will never say it yourself. You made this. Not your husband, whose part in it was to earn the money and to agree, in March, that it might be Blackpool, and to carry the trunk down the steps this morning. Everything between those 2 acts was yours. The saving, the choosing of the town, and the writing to 3 lodging houses, and the reading of the replies, the counting of 7 days of linen for 5 people, the tinned things, the medicine bottle, the management of 3 children through 3 hours of railway carriage, the daily arithmetic of what could be said yes to, the negotiation in the hallway on Wednesday, conducted in such perfect courtesy that neither of you had to admit it was a negotiation, the knowing at every hour of every day exactly how much money remained. That is a considerable body of work, performed continuously, at full attention, for 6 days, while also being on holiday. And in September, when it is talked about, it will be talked about as a thing your husband gave his family. He will not claim it. He will not need to. The language available to everybody involved will do it for him, automatically, the way it does with everything. Both of those things are true. The competence is real, and so is the fact that it will not be credited. Neither one cancels the other, and you are not owed the tidy comfort of pretending otherwise. The train pulls out at 10 minutes past 11. For a while, there are roofs, and then a gasworks, and then a long grey embankment rising slowly on the left-hand side. And behind the embankment, there is a strip of water going in and out of sight between the gaps. Then the line turns inland, and the strip is gone. Your youngest is asleep against your arm, with sand in the turn-ups of her stockings. The compartment settles. Somebody's newspaper folds and does not open again. And the carriage goes quiet and stays quiet all the way to the hills.